The thing nobody tells you about the wilderness is not that it can kill you, it is that it can watch you. And the difference between those two facts is the entire distance between fear and dread. Weston Albrecht had worked for the National Park Service for 11 years before he stopped filing accurate reports. That alone should tell you something. He was not the kind of man who rounded numbers or softened language. He had written detailed incident documentation on a black bear fatality in Sequoia in 2014, a lightning strike cluster near Glacier's Logan Pass in 2017, and a technical rope rescue off the north face of Hallett Peak in 2019, where the subject had been hanging for 6 hours before Albrecht reached him. He was known within the Intermountain region as a man whose paperwork was unusually good, precise, factual, without the hedging and passive construction that characterize most NPS incident reports. He stopped filing accurate reports in late September of 2021. What he filed instead were technically complete documents: weather conditions, patrol routes, trail conditions, wildlife sign. They were not lies exactly, they were carefully constructed absences. He had learned to leave things out the way a surgeon leaves a sponge inside a patient, knowing full well what he was doing and deciding that the alternative was worse. The alternative in Albrecht's case was explaining what happened in the Kawunichi Valley on September 14th, September 19th, and the night of September 23rd, 2021, in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. He has since left the NPS. He now lives in Whitefish, Montana, where he owns a small equipment repair shop and does not spend time outdoors after dark. He agreed to speak on the condition that no recording be made and that none of what he said be attributed to him directly. The account that follows was reconstructed from 3 separate conversations, cross-referenced with personal journal notes he had maintained since his first season as a seasonal interpretive ranger in 2010. He was not the first person to notice something wrong in that valley. That distinction belongs to Priya Nkemdarim, a backcountry ranger stationed at the Timber Creek Patrol Cabin for 3 summers running. Nkemdarim is harder to reach. She did not leave the NPS voluntarily. She transferred to a desk position within the agency and has since been reassigned twice, currently working in an administrative capacity for the Southeast region. When contacted for this account, she responded to the first 2 messages and then went silent after the third, which contained a specific question about the date of September 19th. The third person is Domingo Achterberg, a volunteer wilderness ranger during the same period. He completed his service in October 2021 and declined to return the following year, unusual for someone who had previously renewed 4 consecutive seasons. He now teaches high school earth science in Longmont, Colorado. He was the most willing to talk and the most frightened while doing so. He cried once during the second conversation, not from grief, he said, but from something he described as a specific kind of shame, the shame of having been in the presence of something he could not account for, and having chosen, for a long time, to simply not account for it. What all 3 described, across separate conversations with no coordination between them, was the same sequence of events, or something close enough that the differences feel like differences in perception rather than differences in fact. It began with a smell, not a bad smell. Nkemdarim described it as clean, almost antiseptic, the way a hospital corridor smells at 3 in the morning when the floor has just been mopped and the building has gone quiet. She first noticed it on September 6, 2021, during a routine patrol of the Onahu Creek Trail, approximately 1.4 miles from the trailhead at the Onahu Creek parking area off US 34. She noted it in her personal log, but not in her official patrol report. It was, she said, the kind of thing that seemed too strange to write down in official language and too minor to justify unofficial language. She kept walking. The smell faded within about 30 meters. Albrecht encountered the same smell on September 9th, 5 days later, on the Colorado River Trail near the Laputer Pass Junction. He described it identically: clinical, institutional, entirely wrong for that environment at that elevation, that time of year. He also did not report it. He mentioned it in passing to Nkemdarim during a check-in call on September 11th, and she went very quiet on the other end of the line before saying that she had smelled the same thing, and asked him exactly where he had been standing when he noticed it. They compared the coordinates as precisely as they could and found the locations approximately 7.2 miles apart. They discussed whether there might be a natural explanation, some mineral compound in the groundwater, a rare fungal bloom, some weather condition that concentrated certain elements along the valley floor. Albrecht, who had spent 11 years explaining the natural world to people who found it confusing, could not think of one. He filed this away as a puzzle and moved on. Achterberg smelled it on September 12th, near the beaver ponds at the north end of the valley, roughly halfway between the locations where Albrecht and Kemderim had encountered it. He had never spoken to either of them about it. He described it, when asked years later, as the smell of a laboratory. Specifically, he said, of a laboratory that has been sealed for a long time and then suddenly opened. The smell was the first thing. In isolation, it could have been explained away. On September 14th, Albrecht was conducting an evening patrol along the western edge of the valley, checking on a site where elk had been congregating unusually near the road. He had been doing this patrol at roughly the same time for the previous 2 weeks, beginning around 6:45 p.m. and ending near the Timber Creek campground, usually around 8:20 or 8:30. The elk were there, as expected, in a meadow about 200 meters north of the Colorado River. He counted 17 animals and noted their positions. He took his usual photographs. What he noticed, standing at the edge of the tree line with the light going golden and flat across the grass, was that the meadow had gone silent. This requires some unpacking because meadows are not loud. What he means is that the specific texture of sound belonging to a meadow with 17 elk in it, the low percussion of their movement through dry autumn grass, the occasional contact call, the sound of their breathing at distance, was absent. The elk were still moving. He could see them moving, but he could not hear them moving. He assumed at first that he had gone momentarily deaf. He has never had hearing problems before or since. He stood very still and listened, and what he heard instead of the elk was his own heartbeat, distinct, loud, metronomic, and beneath it, something else. A rhythm that was not his. A rhythm that was close to his, but not identical. Slightly slower, falling just behind his own pulse, the way an echo falls behind a voice, except that an echo mirrors perfectly, and this did not mirror perfectly. It was slightly wrong in a way he could not then articulate and still struggles to articulate. He described it in our third conversation as the difference between your reflection in a still pond and your reflection in a pond that someone is standing in on the other side. The surface is almost right. The image is almost yours. He left the meadow. The elk went on grazing. The sound returned to normal within about 100 meters. He did not look back. He told Kemderim about this on the 15th. She listened without saying anything for a long time. Then she told him that on the 13th, the day before, she had experienced something adjacent. She had been sitting on the steps of the Timber Creek patrol cabin at dusk, eating dinner, when she became aware that the sound of the creek, Timber Creek, which runs about 30 meters from the cabin, and which she had been listening to every evening for 3 summers, whose particular rhythm she knew as well as she knew the sound of her own refrigerator at home, had changed. Not stopped, changed. The water was still running, but the pattern of its sound, the way it stuttered and rushed over the particular arrangement of rocks near the bend south of the cabin, was different. Not different the way water changes when a beaver moves a dam or a tree falls across the channel. Different the way a song is different when someone who has memorized it but does not understand music plays it back. All the notes technically correct, but the timing subtly, irrecoverably off. She had walked to the creek and looked at the rocks. Nothing had changed. The rocks were where they had always been. She stood there for a long time, listening, and the sound continued to be wrong. And eventually she went back inside because she didn't know what else to do. It corrected itself sometime in the night. In the morning, the creek sounded normal. Achterberg, on September 14th, was on the Crater Trail near its junction with the Red Mountain Trail, counting raptor activity as part of a hawk watch protocol. He had a notebook, a spotting scope, and a radio. He had been at the same location at the same time 3 days in a row. At approximately 7:10 p.m., he looked up from his scope and saw, at the upper edge of his field of view, a figure standing on the ridge approximately 400 meters above him. He did not think anything of this immediately. Hikers use that ridge. There was no established trail, but experienced off-trail hikers accessed it occasionally from the North Inlet trailhead on the park's eastern boundary. He raised his scope to get a better look out of professional habit. Backcountry rangers and volunteer rangers are trained to be aware of people in remote locations, assess their condition, make contact if needed. He could not get the figure into focus. This was not a malfunction of the scope. He had been using it all afternoon. He tried adjusting the diopter, the focus wheel, the zoom. The figure remained at the same level of resolution regardless of adjustment, present and visible to the naked eye, but resistant to magnification, as though it existed at a depth that optics could not resolve. He described it as looking at a photograph of a photograph, recognizably human in outline, but without the detail that a human body at that distance would have had in the evening light. He watched it for 6 minutes. It did not move. He lowered the scope and looked with his naked eye, and it was still there. He raised the scope again. He could not bring it into focus. He lowered the scope a second time and wrote the time, 7:16 p.m., in his notebook, and when he looked up again, the figure was gone. He told no one. He wrote nothing in his patrol notes. He went back to his hawk count. The three of them did not compare these specific accounts until much later, after the events of September 23rd, in a single, unplanned conversation. All three present at Timber Creek during a patrol review, sitting outside afterward, and someone said something, and then someone else said something, and it unraveled the way these things unravel. Slowly, then all at once. On September 19th, Nkemderim was woken at 2:47 a.m. by the sound of something outside the Timber Creek cabin. She knew the time because she looked at her watch immediately, the way people who have spent time in remote locations learn to do, time-stamping their wakefulness in case it matters. She lay still and listened. What she heard was footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Bears come near the cabin occasionally, and their movement has a specific heaviness, a rhythm that matches their gait. These were human in cadence, bipedal, evenly spaced, unhurried, circling the cabin. She estimated the circuit at about 15 meters, which matched the perimeter of the cabin and its attached storage lean-to. She stayed in her bunk for what she estimated at 4 minutes, possibly 5, then took her flashlight and her radio and went to the door. The footsteps stopped the instant her hand touched the door handle. Not slowed, not paused, stopped. As though they had been waiting for exactly that specific moment, for the exact tactile signal of a hand on a handle, and had responded to it instantly. She stood with her hand on the handle for a long time. She opened the door. There was no one there. The ground outside the cabin was soft enough, it had rained 2 days before, that footprints should have been visible. She shone her flashlight in a complete circuit around the cabin. The ground was unmarked. Not just unmarked by human feet, unmarked. No deer tracks, no elk tracks, no sign of any recent passage. The soil within 2 meters of the cabin wall was as smooth as if it had been carefully raked. The smell was there, the hospital smell, the laboratory smell, the smell of a sealed room opened after a long time. It faded within about 2 minutes. She went back inside and did not sleep again that night. On September 23rd, all three were in the valley. Nkemderim at the cabin, Albrecht on the Colorado River Trail, Achterberg on the Crater Trail for a sunset raptor count. This was not coordinated. It was coincidence, or it was not. What happened to each of them between 7:30 and 7:45 p.m., as the light was failing, is the part each finds most difficult to describe and most reluctant to discuss. Not because it was violent. None of them were harmed, physically. Albrecht was standing near the river when he became aware that something was standing behind him. He did not hear it approach. He did not see it in his peripheral vision. He simply became aware of a presence at his back, the way you become aware sometimes in an empty house that the house is not entirely empty. He turned around. There was nothing there, but the air had a quality he could not describe, except to say that it had depth in a way empty air should not have depth, as though something was present that cast no shadow, displaced no air, made no sound, but occupied space regardless. He stood very still. And then, and this is the part he repeats the most carefully in all three conversations, the part he seems most concerned about getting right, he felt his own heartbeat change. Not speed up, not slow down. shift into a rhythm that was not his. The same rhythm he had heard in the meadow on September 14th. His heart, beating at someone else's pace. He walked back to his vehicle. He did not run because some instinct told him that running would matter, that the decision not to run was important in a way he couldn't explain, the way certain decisions and dreams carry a significance the waking mind cannot access. Nikimdarim, at the cabin, at approximately the same time, heard the sound of her own name spoken from a specific location, the tree line 30 meters to the north. She knew it was her name because the phonemes were correct. Pri-ya, 2 syllables, the stress on the first. But the voice was wrong. It was not a voice she recognized, and it was not a voice. It was something that understood how voices worked and was attempting the form with a precision that was almost right. The way a person who has learned a language from recordings can produce all the correct sounds and yet still be recognized instantly as someone for whom the language is not native. Something native was missing. She could not tell me what that native thing was. She is certain she cannot tell me what it was. She did not respond. She went inside. She locked the door, which was something she had not done once in 3 summers at that cabin. Achterberg, on the ridge, saw the figure again. This time it was closer, perhaps 200 meters. This time his scope resolved it. He looked through the optic and saw a human shape in enough detail to note. Upright, still, facing his direction, no visible gear, no visible pack, dressed in something dark or neutral. He noted, with a professionalism he is still somewhat proud of, that the figure's posture was identical to his own. The same tilt of the head, the same position of the arms. He was standing with his scope raised to his eye and one hand resting on his hip, and the figure on the ridge was doing the same. Except that it had no scope, and it had no hip resting hand, and so the mimicry was not precise. It was close. It was the level of closeness that is worse than an exact copy, because an exact copy is merely technical, and this was interpretive, and interpretation implies comprehension. He lowered the scope. He packed his gear. He walked back to his vehicle at a pace he describes as controlled, deliberate, and agonizing. None of them filed reports. None discussed it with supervisors. Albrecht submitted a standard patrol log covering weather and elk counts. Nikemdarim's log for September 23rd is 2 sentences long, both procedural. Achterberg's Hawkwatch form shows a count that stops abruptly at 7:28 p.m. with the notation, observation discontinued, conditions. He has no memory of writing that. The question of what was in the Kawunachi Valley in September 2021 is not one any of them can answer. Albrecht has a theory that he explicitly does not want included because, he says, naming a theory is a kind of naming, and he has decided that naming is dangerous. Nikemdarim has no theory and considers the absence of a theory to be the correct response to something that does not operate within the logic that theories require. Achterberg, the earth science teacher, the most scientifically trained of the 3, said something in our final conversation that he asked be recorded verbatim. So here it is, verbatim. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it wanted. I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is whether want is a concept that applies to it at all. I don't think it is. I think it does what it does the way weather does what weather does. But weather doesn't memorize your heartbeat. The Kawunachi Valley remains open to visitors. The Colorado River Trail is rated as easy to moderate. The Timber Creek Campground has 98 sites and is described on the NPS website as an excellent base for exploring the park's western side. None of the 3 have returned. If you recognize something in this account, a smell, a sound that is yours and not yours, a figure that knows your posture before you know it, there is no advice to offer. There never is. What you can do is subscribe and share this story, because more people knowing means more people watching, and whatever it is, it seems to prefer the unwitnessed.